Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning from Oxford, and good afternoon, good evening to those of you joining us on Zoom from lots of different places around the world. Can you all hear me okay on Zoom? And I'm not looking at you because I'm in a meeting room with about 10 screens and 10 cameras around me, so really not sure where to look. Welcome to the Social Outcome Conference, and thank you, Tanya, for the pointer. This is the first year that the Government Outcomes Lab is hosting the Social Outcome Conference in a hybrid mode. We don't like to make life easy for ourselves. As some of you might know, last year we hosted the session entirely online, and we were really energized by the number of people who were able to join the conference. So this year we wanted to continue. We wanted to be able to engage with as many people as possible, but we also wanted to take advantage of the fact that we are able to use this beautiful building. We've got an incredible AV team. We've got Jamie from the AV team helping us today. Do bear with us a little bit. It's the first time we're doing something in this way and of this scale. We've got hundreds of people that we're expecting over the next 2 days. We've got about 50 participants that we're expecting in person in Oxford, and literally hundreds online. We've done a lot of preparation, backup plans, and so on, but we're at the mercy of the gods of Zoom and internet. Really, please do bear with us. The whole of the GoLab team is here to help you. You'll see on Zoom our names and organizations. So if you run into any trouble, just contact one of them. Likewise, for those of you in person, I've got Ruth with us here, Mara and Tanya and Juliana as well. So for any issues, just grab one of them. A couple more practical tips, pointers from me, and then I'll hand over to our chair. For those here in the room, I've already mentioned this. Please just make sure if you do join the conversation on Zoom as well, that you keep yourselves muted with your speakers off at all times. But otherwise, do feel free to join the discussions on Zoom. We will stop throughout the session to take questions. So we'll alternate between questions from the online participants and from those here in the room. Can I turn my attention now to the Zoom participants? So just a big welcome to everyone. And actually, can I get everyone in the room just to do a big wave to everyone on Zoom, just to make sure they can see us? Excellent, great. And likewise, Jamie, I don't know if it's too much trouble to change the view so that the participants in here can see everyone on Zoom. And I'll ask everyone to put their videos on and just wave at us in Oxford, just so we know you're there listening to us, paying attention and so on. Let's see a big wave. Excellent. Great. I'm sure there are lots of things that I forgot to mention. We might run into technical issues, but fingers crossed. So with that, a really, really warm welcome, everyone. And I'll hand over to Jiho now. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And big welcome from Oxford, everyone. It's wonderful being back after a year of doing this virtually last year in this beautiful, beautiful building. That's the Blavatnik School of Government. Welcome to those of you, especially joining from different time zones. Really appreciate it. I know it's evening in Japan, and I know you work late, but it's still very, very grateful that you've taken the time to join us. I have to say, Andrea was talking about this is the first time the GoLab is doing this on hybrid. And we are the first ones to get going, to kick off the 2-day conference. So it is exciting, but a bit nerve-wracking, because I don't know about you, chairing a round table normally is difficult enough. And when you're trying to chair that with some of the speakers here in person, many more joining on chat, and then same with the panelists. Things can go wrong, so do bear with us. If anything is less than tip-top, it's certainly no reflection on the quality of the panelists we have, nor of the wonderful tech support that the school here has been giving us. So just can I say, it's also so exciting to be kind of like a warm-up act for the keynote who's a Nobel Prize laureate. It's just so exciting, but I mustn't jump ahead of myself. So maybe let me try to start to position today's roundtable. This really is a conversation that's been continuing now for a few years about this international exchange. So obviously things like impact bonds kicked off in the UK in 2010, it's traveled around the world. So what is it looking like? How are people using it? Are some of the intentions and objectives behind it now, starting to evolve as these kinds of instruments take root in different jurisdictions and contexts? And at last year's conference, there are a number of slides that should come up soon where we have summarized a number of the discussions that we had at last year's conference. So, yep, they're up now. And there were 4 themes that we particularly talked about last year. The first is, unsurprisingly, things like outcomes-based commissioning, impact bonds, as innovative, as driving forms of innovation. And as you can imagine, there was a really animated debate last year with proponents on both sides of that debate, and also critiquing what do we mean by innovation, who drives it, where is it coming from. The second theme we discussed last year was linked to that innovation theme, and that's a really well-known issue of the scale of the impact bond projects that we have. They're still largely small, costly, complex. So again, there was good discussion about the enablers of scale, but also the barriers to scale. The third theme we talked about on the next slide is about, does private financing add value? How does it add value if it does indeed bring value? And I think panelists from last year came to the conclusion that really, as impact bonds and these kinds of outcomes-based contracting instruments start traveling around the world, there are really very different expectations for what capital is supposed to do. So what are the functions and objectives of capital? And therefore, any assessment of the value of the added value of private financing is really contingent upon those expectations that the role of capital is intended to play. And then last but not least, we asked our panelists last year to gaze into their crystal ball and tell us what do they think is going to happen? What are some of the developments that are coming next? And actually, isn't it exciting? I don't know whether Kevin Tan from Tri Associates is online, but isn't it exciting that last year he was saying, we're going to bring out a social impact guarantee. And for those of you who've been following the news, Singapore has now brought out the first social impact guarantee. So it just shows that these things evolve so quickly. So we are right in the midst of that, and it's really, really exciting. So coming to this year's roundtable, the title is From Pilot to System Change. Now, we have no doubt all our panelists today would find those themes from last year resonating with their experiences, but we have given them a strict steer not to just repeat the points that were already being raised last year, but really to try to move the debate forward. So from pilot to systems change, I think the title of this roundtable really alludes to the fact that for many of us, we tend to approach outcomes-based approaches, impact bonds, as projects, as discrete, almost standalone projects. And we look at their utility, their value through that type of lens. But actually, it's a different way of looking at this picture. Is there a different way of looking at this discussion around value, around outcomes, that really goes beyond the constructs of any specific project? And to help us interrogate that issue today, we have a wonderful, wonderful, very diverse mix of panelists. So without further ado, let's get acquainted with all of them. Could I start online by, let's say, going to South Africa first, because it is so international. Let's start with South Africa. And Farid, can you hear me? Over to you, Farid.
Yes, hi, everybody. And thanks for the invitation to say a few words and to be brief about it. Can I just check the acoustics? You can hear me clearly? Yeah, so I work with the Medical Research Council, which is a government agency linked to the Department of Health, and we have explored the possibility of putting together a social impact bond, mainly because of the kind of public financing position that we find ourselves in. So we're a country that's in debt, more debt than we've ever had before. Our ratings agencies have downgraded South Africa, so the cost of borrowing is high, and within the health sector we have it's common cause that we have poor performance, and we're not really getting value for money. So we're looking for a new public finance offering to see if we can't get more value for money, improve performance. And we've picked a difficult area. Perhaps with hindsight, we might have picked an easier area, which is to put together a social impact bond for adolescent girls and young women to address their HIV and unplanned pregnancy-related needs. This is to be run through the schooling system. And we're at the stage now where we have government outcomes funding for this project in the region of about 100 million rand. We've got all the pieces in place. So we have a good local investor, an implementer, verifications agent, and we're at the stage now where after more than 2 years of research and planning, we're negotiating contracts, but we still need government approval from multiple departments, mainly the Treasury. That's easier said than done because there's no regulatory framework within the South African public sector for an impact bond. So we're kind of negotiating each step of the transaction, going off the first principles of what exists in legislation and in regulations at the moment. So let me stop there and just to say that to be clear, we haven't started the implementation of this project. The contracts are almost signature ready, and in a few weeks we expect Treasury approval for this. But if we're confident we'll get that, and then the implementation will kick off. So let me stop right there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Farid. And absolutely, I think it's going to be fascinating listening to people who are in the process of the design, because sometimes when the project is launched, and all you get captured are the facts of what the project looks like. So I think you can add a lot in terms of the thinking that's led you to this stage. Moving on, we're still staying with the African continent and to two colleagues working on a development impact bond from Cameroon. So Louise first. Start with Hortense. Oh, okay. Let me start with Hortense first from online chat. So Hortense, over to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today speaking with you all. So I'm Hortense Manjo. I'm the Development Impact Bond Program Director based at the Kangaroo Foundation. So the Cameroon Kangaroo Mother Care Development Impact Bond was created to address neonatal mortality for small and sick newborns by transferring and adapting kangaroo mother care from where it has been well evidenced, like Colombia, to 10 hospitals in 5 regions of Cameroon. And this impact bond funded our foundation to train public sector clinicians, as well as ensure that they can train others. So the program delivery for this project started in February 2019, right through to June 2021. So we are really wrapping up the sustainability activities, and we expect it to close by the end of this month. So our ambition for this project was really to improve outcomes for at least 1,000 babies over the course of the program, and we're happy to see that we've exceeded this ambition. And over 80% of babies who are returning for follow-up appointments have registered appropriate weight at their 40th week gestational age appointments. And our final program report has been released, and we'll be happy to share with you today. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Hortense. Thank you, Chi-Hong. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name's Louise Saville. I'm a director in the international team at Social Finance based in the UK. Social Finance has been pleased to work in partnership with a whole number of actors that you can see, I think, on the slide that's in front of you to design, structure, and during the implementation phase, support the implementation and the adaptive management of the programme to deliver some of the fantastic results that Hortense has shared today, although really the hard work was done by her and her team on the ground and partners like the Ministry of Public Health in Cameroon. And I'm pleased to see Dr. Beye on the call today. So welcome. Social Finance is a specialist intermediary. We structure, design, and support the delivery of outcomes-based partnerships. And we've supported a number of them over the years, but I think for me, the Cameroon Kangaroo Mother Care DIB is unusual in that government has really been front and centre of this DIB right from the design phase through to now the planning for what happens now the DIB is closing. They were a contractual outcomes funder. They have supported the technical delivery, and now they're working really hard to embed the lessons from the Development Impact Bond in their policy and planning for neonatal health beyond the DIB. So we're really thrilled to be part of the discussion today.
Great, thanks Hortense and Louise. And still staying with the African continent, let me bring in Juliet Eversang, who has tremendous experience of working in sub-Saharan Africa. Over to you, Juliet.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So delighted to be here. I'm Juliette Eversang. I'm representing COIS today. So we are an impact finance firm with 4 offices across Belgium, France, UK and India, and with project work covering all continents. We design and structure a range of innovative finance mechanisms, including impact bonds and blended finance funds. And we also help organizations devise and shape their investment strategies to enhance their social impact. Today, I'll be more specifically talking about the Development Impact Bond that will soon be launched in collaboration with the French Development Agency, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the NGO Care International, and the French banking group BNP Paribas, focused on menstrual hygiene, health and hygiene in Ethiopia. This DIB will finance an innovative and holistic set of interventions, including awareness raising, production and distribution of menstrual health products, and building and renovation of sanitary infrastructures in school. It will target not only girls and women, but their whole communities and families as well. The success of the DIB will be assessed against a range of gender-focused impact metrics, such as, for example, the increased mobility of women and girls during their menstruation, as well as the increased level of knowledge around menstruation and their challenges among the community. We'll be talking today about some of the success factors that we experienced structuring this DIB and how these DIBs can be also used to drive systemic change nationally. Thank you all, and looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you. And now moving from Africa to Europe, we have Laura Blanco from Spain.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this great panel to share what we've been doing in Spain. I represent the Spanish National Advisory Board for Impact Investment. So we are members of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment. And what we are doing in Spain is trying to build the market for impact investment in general. And in particular, one of the lines of work is innovation, financial innovation, to create impact and social innovation. And in this line of work, social outcome contracts, and in particular social impact bonds, plays a very important role. And we've been working with the stakeholders in Spain, trying to, in a collaborative manner, looking for identifying the exactly the elements, the factors that would be necessary to develop the market for social impact bonds. So we are trying to take a different approach, a systemic approach, a system change approach, instead of like an individual case-by-case approach. And we've been working, as I said, with commissioners from different Spanish municipalities and regions. We've been working with social service providers that are interested in using this tool. And we've also been working with the intermediaries that have been oiling the space for several years now, and with investors. And we've been coming up with principles, 10 principles that we think would be necessary to actually develop social impact bonds with a market approach and exploit their full potential. And we also been identifying some measures that we'll be talking about today to just propel this market approach. And basically, co-creation is one of the most important ones, and also, financing through outcomes funds and some regulatory changes. So I'm delighted to be here. I must say that we don't have a social impact bond yet in Spain, but there is one in the making that is pretty advanced for the municipality of Madrid on homelessness, and that we hope will be launched probably before the end of this year. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. And continuing on our world tour, next up, very exciting. We have someone here joining us from the UAE, United Arab Emirates, from Abu Dhabi. Faisal.
Good afternoon from Abu Dhabi. Thank you for inviting us for this panel, and happy to share our experience in adopting the social impact bond in Abu Dhabi. My name is Faisal Hamoudi. I'm Executive Director of Social Incubator and Contracting in the Social Authority of Social Contributions in Abu Dhabi. And one of our, I would say, key objective inside the Social Contribution Authority is to drive innovations. And we have multiple tools to drive innovation. And one of them is social contracting, where we are adopting the social impact bond. And this today, I'm happy to say we last year we launched the first social impact bonds. It's named Atomah. This project is focusing on the people of disability. It's the first social impact bonds implement in the Gulf regions, and also the first social impact bonds in the area of people of disability. In the last year, we engaged with multiple stakeholders, and for Atomah project, an example, we have multiple key players like the outcome player like Department of Community Development, and we have social investor who engage in this project, Dar Properties. Also, we act as an intermediary as a man. Also, we have a provider named Dar Academy, and happy to be part of this panel to share our experience in adopting the social impact bonds. And we have I would say long strategy in adopting more social impact bond project in Abu Dhabi, and maybe this year we will have more 2 projects. It will be in implementation stage, and happy to share all our experience, especially in how we explore and design and implement this type of innovative tools inside Abu Dhabi.
Thank you, Faisal. And so now moving on from the Middle East to India, where we've got a cluster of panelists. So let me bring in Mayapan and Rakshita first, please.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here today. As a quick introduction, I'm Maya. I lead the social sector, social finance practice at Nishit Desai Associates. As a quick background, Nishit Desai Associates is a law firm that focuses primarily on cross-border transactions, and we have a long history of both on the for-profit side and on the non-profit side, helping companies and foundations with their operations in India. Over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of advisory, transactional, and policy work in the social finance space. We worked with UNDP, World Bank, and Impact Investors Council on the policy side. We are leading several the social impact bond transactions, and we are advising on them currently. In our experience, we have seen it's not the lack of commercial interest that's the problem. It's actually the law that, instead of being an enabler, has been an impediment in our experience, and has caused a lot of complexity. But that's what I think we're here to share today. And we've also published academic papers and book chapters. So we have done some academic work in this space as well. I'll hand over to my colleague Rakshita to introduce herself.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks, Chi. Hi, everyone. I'm Rakshita Agarwal. I've been a part of the social sector and social finance team at NDA with Maya. And at NDA, I've been involved in advising and drafting on impact bonds and structuring outcome funding contracts, advising the clients with respect to foreign contributions and offshore grants, and advising clients with respect to their CSR obligations. So NDA has been a good experience with respect to impact investment, and a lot of new innovative models are coming up in India, and we are very happy to be a part of both on the structuring side of those models and the contracting side of it. And currently, I'm on my way to pursue my Master of Laws degree from the University of Cambridge. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here with all of you today to share our experiences and also to learn from others' experiences in this space.
Thank you both. And I suspect legislation and regulation is probably going to come up later in the roundtable discussion. But still staying with the Indian context, it's with great pleasure that I bring in two colleagues from the British Asian Trust. So Krisha and Abha.
Hi, Chihu. The way you're introducing us sort of reminds me of the Olympics, maybe having just come out of a summer of the Olympics, you're going from country to country. So Chihu, I had to say that to you. It's lovely to be here. My name is Abha. I'm from the British Asian Trust. I'm one of the executive directors, unfortunately also been part of the many, many experiments we've taken in development finance. And this was a big experiment that has become a baby. It's very bad when you start owning the baby. Louise will tell you, when you stay with the problem as they grow up, you deal with the teenage years after the early years, and you grow old with the problems and therefore the complexities, maybe the challenges and the joys. And I'm here to share that joy. We shared as an Indian group yesterday how India is a crucible of innovation in impact bonds. With several of our colleagues, we are one of many. And with that crucible of innovation, the next step is scale. Our policymakers yesterday said we need startup mentality, population scale. And that's the challenge that we are focused on. In the pandemic, that took us to very interesting places. And I'll get Krisha to give you 3 quick snippets of what we learned during the pandemic while designing, delivering, and now launching in a month, if our lawyers, Mayappa, who's on the call, inks our deal for us. And so over to you, Krisha.
Thanks, Abha. Hi, everyone. And it's lovely to be here in the same virtual room as you all, if not there in person in Oxford. And hello and good morning to everyone in the UK and to everyone who's in the other part of the world. As Abha said, we've been thinking about impact bonds while a lot of the world has gone crazy in the last year or so. We are right now in the final year of our education impact bond, and through the last year, we've also been designing a skilling impact bond with the Government of India and several other private sector partners. Through this period, I think our learnings are about 3 things, and we want to bring in some of that flavor in our conversations today. One is about people, and perhaps the most important thing. We think of these instruments as structures that will help solve a complex problem. But I think the most important factor in all of this is people that you work with around the table. As we've all been affected by the pandemic, it's been very difficult and very different working through, working, not being across a table, but being spread around different parts of the country, working with them. And people have gone through different experiences as well, illnesses. And that was perhaps a different and a difficult way to do this. And we'll talk about that and we'll bring our experiences from that. I think the other part of the people are the beneficiaries who we do this for, are users on these impact bonds. We work on an education impact bond and the skilling impact bond. Last year, as the pandemic hit India, hundreds of thousands of people in India walked back home to their homes in rural areas. As we were designing as a livelihood bond, we had to think about how this would affect the program. How working through this much uncertainty, how do you think about the beneficiaries? How do you bring them more front and center as you're designing and perhaps thinking of all extreme situations. And I think that brings me to my final learning that we want to share with you guys today through this conversation is around the design itself, the what of what we do. As we were doing all of this, the normal design principles that are now, I guess, becoming more and more standard as Abha said, in the teenage years on this. But as we were designing in the pandemic, it's been very, very different. The design choices we faced, the uncertainty which forced us to think about extremes all the time. So that has also been an interesting experience, and we'll talk about that as we go through this conversation. How do you think about extremes? How do you manage for them? How do you think about all the different variations that can happen in the year? So that's it from us, and really looking forward to speaking to all of you today and learning from everyone. Back to you, Ian.
Thanks, Krisha. And Abba, I love the image you just conjured up about, a newborn and then being a rowdy teenager and moving through the different life phases. And how do we actually manage this offspring that's grown into something else with its own identity? And Abba, this isn't choreographed, believe it or not, when she was talking about the sports commentating, because next up is Japan. We're just ending the Olympics and Paralympics, where again, we've got a cluster of panelists. Could I start off by bringing in Reiji Ikeda from the Japanese Ministry of Justice, please?
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening from Tokyo. Thank you for inviting me to a great hybrid meeting today. My name is Reiji Ikeda. I'm currently a senior probation officer at the Tokyo Probation Office, the Ministry of Justice in Japan. My professional life in government includes varied roles, such as policymakers, practitioners, as well as researchers, data scientists. It is from the perspective as a researcher responsible for government data management and outcome evaluation that I speak to today. In Japan, there has been dramatic progress in developing payroll success scheme, thanks to nonprofit organization, including Professor Tsukamoto, who is here today. This year, the Ministry of Justice will start a pilot 2-year SIB program, the Learning Support Program for Youth Offenders. This is the first SIB program at the national level. So next January, I will be conducting research at the government outcomes level. The aim is to develop an informative knowledge bank for colleagues in the Japanese government. In particular, my research focuses on the methodologies on data management. In my opinion, good evaluation process can motivate stakeholders, including the government. I look forward to learning about other countries' in-depth case studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reiji. And last but certainly not least, we have two final colleagues joining from Japan who are working outside of government. So Haruka Yamasaki and Professor Ichiro Tsukamoto. Haruka first.
Hi. Hi, I'm Haruka. I'm from Japan and I work at Deloitte Japan. And thank you for having me here in this wonderful, exciting conference today. Our role in impact bond market is an intermediary to support local governments to design impact bond projects. And in Japan, local governments are keen to use impact bond scheme in urban development policy area because it is difficult for them to spread their tight budget into new issues and arise from rapid social change. So now impact bond is expected to be an efficient policy tool in urban development as well. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ichiro?
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk about social bond with you all. I'm Ichiro Tsukamoto, professor at Meiji University. I have been engaged in international compatible research on social bond in Japan and the UK and United States. In addition to this, I'm engaged in the management private company. So in this company, I have been engaged in designing structure and impact measurement framework of social impact bond for local governments, such as Yokohama City government. I'm very happy to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ichiro. And there you have it, everyone, our wonderful and numerous panelists. So you can see how chairing this roundtable is really going to be a walk in the park, isn't it? But that's almost a whiz around the world, and we did it in about 20 minutes rather than 80 days. So just to say, to give a bit of a clearer focus to the discussion, because as you can imagine, it's potentially a very vast, rambling topic. We've settled on 3 hooks. So one, rather than talk about individual projects and their scale, their size, we're talking about what's a scale of ambition, what's a scale and clarity of that wider purpose, and how do those individual projects connect up to that, which then leads to the second hook of the discussion, which is about pathways. So if we're saying there's this thinking or shift from pilot, from project to systems change, what are the pathways through which that's supposed to be achieved? And actually, is that realistic? And last but not least, what are some of the enablers and barriers of us actually achieving those system level outcomes, systemic change through these kinds of outcomes focused projects? So I'm very aware that we've got lots and lots of people joining on Zoom. Do put things in chat, and might I encourage you also just to put in chat what you would like to learn out of this roundtable discussion, and we'll see whether we can work that through in our discussion. No promises there, but let's get the show started, perhaps. So as I mentioned, last year's conference, and you would all be very familiar with it, we talked about the issue of scale. We talked about projects being very small, very complex, very costly. Therefore, do these actually have longevity? Are these sustainable? But actually, it's a different way of looking at these types of outcomes-focused projects. I'd actually quite like to come to Abu Dhabi first, Faisal, because I think you mentioned earlier, Faisal, that Abu Dhabi launched its first social impact bond, the ATMA SIP, and I think ATMA, if I'm right, is Inspire. So it launched its ATMA SIP last year, and forgive me for saying this, but I think by conventional standards, we would think it's classically very small. There are 25 service beneficiaries. The delivery period is 18 months. So, I think there'll be lots of people who are looking at an impact bond that size and of that duration and asking questions like, is there a point to this? What are you trying to achieve through this? So Faisal, might I first come to you for your perspective and thinking about what went behind this thinking of the ATMA SIP in Abu Dhabi?
Thank you, Dr. Sheep. To answer your question, Dr. Sheep, the key element behind adopting the social impact bonds, I will speak in 4 levels. The first thing, MAN. As an authority of social contributions, MAN, one of the key goals is to drive social innovations. And to drive social innovations, you need to have an innovative tool. And we have 4 innovative tools inside MAN, and one of them, social contracting. Social contracting, one of the tools we are using is the social impact bond. And the second goal inside MAN is to bring collaborations between government, private sector, and civil society to support an innovative idea with the purpose of creating better outcome to our community. To create this type of collaborations, you need to have a right mechanism. And the social impact bonds is one of the mechanisms that could fit the collaboration between government, private sector, and civil society. In other level, in the government side level, we are working closely with the Department of Community Development in Abu Dhabi. It is the authority of social regulations, and they define multiple social priority area inside Abu Dhabi with the specific outcomes, data, and validations. And here we can utilize our mechanism as social contracting to be one of the tools to achieve better outcomes target to the government. And from other side, from investment side, Abu Dhabi and the UAE, we have a very mature ecosystem. When you speak about finance ecosystem. Abu Dhabi and the UAE is ranked as a top country in the given index. So we have very well-established ecosystem. When you speak about CSR, when you speak about donations, we have very good ecosystem there in Abu Dhabi. And the last thing, in Abu Dhabi, we have a strong ambitions to be a leader of innovations with the purpose in achieving better outcome to our community. And when we start adopting the social impact bonds in Abu Dhabi, it was a small project, and with the purpose is to build, I would say, familiarity in the ecosystem. And we have 4 key players in the social contract. The first is the government, who has a clear mandate to solve the social priority, with a clear mandate to find solutions to have better result and outcome. The second level, private sector and corporate, private sector and corporate. And here we are targeting the private sector who have interest to achieve better outcome to our communities, and they have a clear strategy in their CSR and investment to be utilized here in our community. And the third player who work closely with us is the service provider, and here now we are targeting non-profit organizations, the social enterprise and normal provider who will innovate a new product and service to the social service here in Abu Dhabi. And the last thing, as a man, we are authority of social contributions, and we act as an intermediary in facilitating and implementing social impact bond and social contracting.
Thanks, Faisal. This is really interesting because I think as you were talking, it just reminded me that in 2014, the Saskatchewan Sweet Dreams Social Impact Bond was launched with 22 beneficiaries, 22 mothers. So actually, that's a smaller social impact bond in terms of the size of coverage compared to yours. But I think what you were talking there is interesting in that it sounds like Abu Dhabi has always started with quite a system-level approach where you mapped your local ecosystem, you mapped where your strengths are, and you talked about the very well-established financing, family business, CSR sector in Abu Dhabi and how you're trying to reorientate them through the mechanism of a small-scale project. But I think your aspirations, as you described, have always been at that strategic level. So I think that's really interesting to observe. Might I come next to maybe Farid? Because I think in your introduction, Farid, you talked about you haven't launched your impact bond yet, but you are at the end phases. And I think in conversations with you, the process hasn't been a walk in the park. It's not been the easiest thing to achieve, which I think probably resonates with a lot of our experiences. So Farid, is it worth the pain? What are you hoping to achieve from doing a bond like that, doing an impact bond like that? Farid?
Thanks. There we go. Yeah, so a couple of quick points. One is that the content area of our impact bond is HIV and unplanned pregnancies in young women. It's really important to understand the South African context here. We are the country with 1/5 of all HIV infections in the world. So this is a problem that looms large in South Africa, and we've made lots of progress in many areas, except in the treatment and prevention of HIV in a young woman school-going age 15 to 19. And we've been trying to fix this problem for more than a decade with very little progress. The second is, and you can see why it goes together with HIV, is an epidemic of unplanned pregnancy in school-going girls. And so the first reason to do this is to target those very, very difficult socially driven health issues, and to see if a new management model, a new set of financial incentives can turn our performance in this area. The second reason for doing this is that in general, our health system is not performing well, and we have a slew of health reforms, and we want to make impact bonds, impact investing, one of the offerings in public finance for healthcare. Because healthcare is such a complex business, you need multiple instruments. And we want to learn how to do the impact bond, but also we want to learn, and perhaps more importantly, we want to learn when to use an impact bond and when to use government grant funding for programs. I think the third thing we'd like to do is that we've struggled within the government sector with our management capabilities, our capacity to manage, and an impact bond allows a private investor to bring their expertise into the operational management of these things. Now, it's taken us about three and a half years to work on this impact bond. And that's largely because the whole area of adolescent reproductive health for adolescent girls and young women has been under researched. So we're at the Medical Research Council. So our default was to do some research in this area, and it turned out to be quite an extensive period of 2 years of research. But it did lead us to what's the best evidence-based intervention, and also, what are the baselines, what are the targets and outcomes we're looking for, and how to put together these targets in a financial model. So that was extremely difficult and perhaps not the best content area to start with, but it is what it is. And then we had the complexity of being locked down in COVID for the last 18 months, which has brought its own risks to this project. Now, having said that, and I'll conclude, it's been a labor of love to put together one pilot. We're very close to closing the deal, to bringing the transaction into being. But through one project, I think we really have cracked all of the systemic issues, in our context, about how to put together a social impact bond. So we're working on our second social impact bond with multi-drug resistant TB, and what took us 3 years to do for adolescent girls, honestly, we think will take us 3 months to do for multi-drug resistant TB. So I've said quite a lot. Perhaps what I can also add, and I see that a number of people are talking about COVID, the COVID risk, we seriously underestimated the COVID risk. But we've had schools shut down, we've had a complete disruption to our school system, which is where this project is really going to be housed. One should not underestimate the COVID risk. Having said that, our Treasury is very keen on this as a public finance instrument, and it has made the investment earmarked for funding for this project. So that's also put this project in a much better footing when your Treasury is behind you. But having said that, it's taking months to get Treasury approvals in terms of our Public Finance Management Act and all the regulatory issues that we have to overcome, which have been onerous. But as I said, it's always difficult the first time around, and our technical partners in social finance keep telling us the first one is the most difficult one and the others become easier. So let me stop there and thank you again. Over.
Thanks, Farid. So, right, no more echo, great. Thanks, Farid. I'll probably come back to you in 3 months' time when you are designing that second impact bond, just to see how prophetic you are in the 3-month duration for designing your second bond. But I think you have stated this. Your assumption that the first one is really, really difficult because actually a lot of the foundations aren't there, like data. And looking at the online chat, I think quite a few of you have been talking about issues to do with data, the transparency around measurement, validation, etc. And I can see people answering questions in the chat as well. So do keep that coming. And I'm sure I'll be inviting some of the speakers to also pick up on the data point later. But coming back to what you just said, Farid, about the first one, you took that length of time because you had to put down the foundation stone. So hopefully future ones, you get there much quicker. But it's also interesting, your observation about how, even though this has taken you more than 3 years, what you see the function of this first project doing is more than just the outcomes of the project or the fiscal efficiencies, but actually you're using it to flush out a whole range of system level barriers that hopefully you then move on to do something about in removing or reducing those barriers. So I think that's really interesting. So on that note, actually, I think it'd be interesting to come to India because, Abba, you were talking earlier and Krisha about, the first one being this baby. And unlike Abu Dhabi and South Africa, India now has this ecosystem where you're doing more and more impact bonds. So Krisha, might I come to you about, is that logic that you've just heard Farid talk about, is that underpinning this growth in that market for doing impact bonds in India, or is it something else? Is efficiency driving it, or are there other motivators?
Thanks, Chi. Definitely resonates for us in India. I think the first few impact bonds, as we said, it was a lot of learning by doing, right? It was a lot of the agenda was driven by either the service providers themselves or by other market participants and not the government, right? It wasn't, the instruments themselves weren't driven for scale. They were driven for innovation, for learning, for experimenting. I think now, definitely, and yesterday we heard this from some of the government representatives as well on our event yesterday, where there's a lot of interest now in thinking about these instruments in terms of what is the cost efficiency that it brings and how does it bring in better decision making? How does it actually push for regional competition, or how does it really help drive better evaluations, and how do you standardize all of this? Having said that, I'll take a step back and talk about two main reasons why why there is now interest in pushing for efficiency. I think one is around standardizing specifically. And when I say that, I mean standardizing in terms of how do you do your evaluation? And I think somebody asked that question in the chat as well. How do you standardize data collection? How do you measure this? And I think Professor Stiglitz has been saying this for a long time. If you don't measure the right thing, you don't take the right decision. So there's one push from that front. And on that, for example, the government of India has recently released an outcome framework where budget items are now tagged onto outcomes, and they are beginning to track outcomes for the budgetary spends. And one of our guests, who's the head of the Planning Commission for India, talked about that yesterday. The second reason why there's interest in pushing on this, or why there's the rationale actually, is around price discovery, which brings in efficiency by itself. So when you do more and more of these instruments, every instrument actually in itself will help lead to some knowledge or better knowledge around what does it really cost to deliver an outcome, what is the price that the payer of outcome should pay. And you can actually pit different innovations against each other. In our education impact bond, for example, there are 4 different types of education interventions that we are testing out, which helps you understand, okay, what is the real price to pay for an education outcome? And that kind of knowledge can really lead to scale, it can lead to more efficiencies. And I guess now that's the real interest as well in thinking about what can these instruments do for the market, and how do you think of learnings, not just for that one instrument, but for the greater sector or for the country.
That's hugely interesting, Krisha. Thank you for that. This price discovery concept and how, and on top of that, it's the standardization topic that people in the chat have also been talking about. And I hope, Krisha's answer has gone some ways to answering some of the questions posed in the chat. But this thinking, this logic that individual projects represent outcomes and aspirations far bigger than just the project itself, I think is really interesting. And we've been hearing people talk about efficiencies at different levels, both in South Africa and in India. And that just reminds me, because Haruka, in your introduction, you said something that really struck me. So I'd like to come to you now. So Japan, high-income country, but my understanding is it has the highest public debt in the world in terms of percentage GDP. I think it's stood last year, 260 something% of GDP. So the context of a country like Japan with such high public debt, are you guys doing these kinds of outcomes projects of impact bonds similarly driven by those efficiency type arguments that other speakers have talked about?
Thank you. And actually, it is about the efficiency. But this time, the context is slightly different. So Japanese authorities are lacking incentive for building financial autonomy on social spending because they are almost automatically compensated for such expenditures by the central government. So they have difficulty spending bills requiring spending on the cover other projects. And especially for that new matters with a lack of empirical evidence for the feasibilities and cost effectiveness. And they have, for example, difficulty implementing projects designed to shape the ideal cities for the future, as in structuring and running performing arts projects or an area development project focusing on well-being for local community revitalization under the weak financial basis. So impact bonds represent a new concept for allowing spending on forward-thinking visions such as CO2 reduction infrastructure projects or arts and cultural projects by measuring multiple impacts such as social, economic, and environmental. And utilizing impact bond scheme would make it easier for local authorities to dedicate more of their budget to these type of projects, and by transferring the risk to private companies and investors, and also accelerating evidence-based policy making. And recently, Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, they supported designing the first urban development impact bond. And I think that this different concept of impact bond will be seen more in Japan, shaping the impact bond scheme or ideas to fit in Japan's context.
Thanks, Haruka. This is fascinating because what I think you've just described there is the Japanese government using mechanisms like impact bond almost to shape a terrain, pushing into the Wild West where public services don't normally go to because of your budgetary sign-off constraints. And actually you are using impact bonds to push this terrain for, if I might put it crudely, the expansion of public services into areas that, it sounds like Japan doesn't traditionally fund certain types of public services. And it builds up using the mechanism of impact bonds to build up that evidence about cost, about outcomes, about, what works. So I think that is really, really fascinating. And I'm just conscious that the debate so far has really been about governments, has been about aspirations for public service, public sector reforms. And I'd like at this point to come to Abba, because Abba, I know that you've been spending years trying to develop an ecosystem approach in India. So apart from these kinds of interests that are around about government or public services, public sector, how does it play out in the context that you're working in? What else might drive this?
Oh, absolutely. Let me actually use the impact investment landscape to give you an example. So India, a leader in impact investment, 45% of deals in the world are led from India. So really a place where we look to for how scale has come from beyond government. And the GIN points to 4 things which we are really looking at. One is the diversity of capital coming in. So not just impact investors, but the PE funds, other kinds of capitals playing. With that diversity comes a sense of competition and collaboration, which has driven the sector. That's one. 2 is the deals become bigger and more and larger. So instead of tiny deals that we see in impact bonds, we have to see larger outcomes funds and larger ticket sizes. 3rd, most sectors are doing it. So WASH, that's water and sanitation, climate, beyond health, education, skills, where we've taken India, but met way beyond. And finally, that point on standardization and alignment on what are we measuring. And I think on all four things, the impact investment market in India has played a really, really big role in getting all those things right for the kind of scale of billions that are moving. So let's come back to our impact bonds, where it is about the government procuring the best outcome. Richard said, why didn't you say it's about the outcomes and not about what you're doing? It is about the outcomes, but all these actors are required. And to your question, Ji, I think all those 4 points need to be there for that kind of market to move. And each actor comes at it with a very different perspective. And there has to be the ability to convene around some points. I hope I've answered your question and also sort of taken it back to impact bonds.
No, I think you have. And it's brilliant approaching it from the impact investing angle rather than necessarily a public service reform angle, because that really shines a light on some of these other system players that I think you've just talked us through. And that actually links back to what I think Faisal was saying about the Abu Dhabi Atma SIP, where actually it's not just the project stakeholders that are being involved. They've actually been engaging and mobilizing the system players. So there's something about clarifying who are the system players in your ecosystem and how do you actually get them to come together to collaborate and to do different things. Could I just stick with India, because so much is happening in India. Maybe coming to Rakshita. You and Mayapan also obviously work in the same context as Abba and Krisha. So, do you have a similar take on what they've just said, or, are your experiences maybe a bit different? Are there problems unmuting Rakshita? Oh, there are problems unmuting Rakshita. Okay, she's on now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on now. So thanks, T. Sure, I totally resonate with Abha on this, because most of the impact bonds in India have actually been driven by intermediaries, or by a consortia of your domestic and international funders. So even most of the impact bonds that we at NDA have been a part of, so these include your domestic and international NGOs and NPOs, or your domestic high net worth individuals, or your development finance institutions. So basically, in the Indian context, the central government has not yet played a major role in the impact bond space. And that's true. A lot of the key players and drivers have been these foreign foundations and the domestic charities. And, then in this context, it becomes quite important for us to understand as to what are the reasons because of which the government has not been so active in this space in India when compared to the other jurisdictions. Because as I see in other places, the government has been quite active in the designing phase, implementation phase, contracting phase, but not in India. And one reason that comes to my mind is lack of public funds here that we have in India. And also, the restricted risk appetite of the government, especially as a result of the COVID-19. So a lot of, so what the impact bonds essentially do here is a lot of the risk is transferred from the government to the private players, and all these private players and philanthropic institutes, they provide easy funds for these impact bonds to carry on. So that has been the landscape largely in India. Apart from that, I feel that there has also been an increased demand with respect to the efficiencies in this space, especially in respect of developmental activities, which is again one of the reasons why the private players have been so active in this space. And over the years, we've also seen there's an increased sensitivity on part of the investors and funders themselves in terms of the results that they're able to create, in terms of the impact that they're creating through their investments and through their funds. And we've seen that a lot of these organizations view the impact bond structures and similar other innovative structures as a potential mode to create long-term impacts. And probably this is the reason why a lot of all these institutions are collaborating and investing in different spaces in India. And now, after having worked on a few impact bonds, now we see that even the government is kind of coming on board and identifying the strong results that the earlier impact bonds have yielded, be it your quality education or Utkrisht or Education India bond. So that learning from the positive results of all these earlier impact bonds, the organizations which are already a part of the Indian ecosystem, they continue to invest in this, and then we're also attracting newer organizations to be a part of this. And somewhere, as a result of all these things, these impact bonds are going beyond the common public reform narrative. We've seen that there are impact bonds which are catering to larger interests, as was also mentioned earlier in the conference, catering to the larger interests of the society, of the community. So for instance, the Skilling India bond on which we are currently working, there it has been anchored on livelihood outcomes of the beneficiaries in the context of COVID-19. So the objective is to ensure employment of people, ensure that they retain jobs. But also there's a gender focus involved in this impact bond. The employment and upliftment of women beneficiaries is highly rewarded. So it is going somewhere, I feel it's going beyond the common public services narrative, and also catering to more individualized needs, and serving the larger goals and tackling multiple issues all at the same time, which I think is quite beautiful.
Thanks, Rakshita. I think what you're talking there about how actually government came in later after this whole agenda in India seems to have been driven by private interests, and linking to what Abba was saying earlier about the different sources of private capital, both collaborating but competing and driving this momentum. And I think that really reminds me that, especially in development impact bonds context that you work very closely in, Louise, there tends to be a wider constellation of interests. So are you hearing anything from the Indian context that you think resonates with you in terms of, from linking a project to these wider systemic shifts? Louise?
Yeah, I think it's certainly the case that often in impact bonds or outcomes partnerships in low or middle income countries, there is often an outcome funder and sometimes many stakeholders that are not only within the country, but also outside the country. And that brings a set of competing interests, I guess, to bear. I think for me, one of the things that is absolutely the most powerful about these kinds of partnerships is that they are partnerships, and they're centered around a shared vision of success and real clarity around what success looks like in terms of the outcomes that they're aiming to achieve. And so I think that's right. I think we can see how powerful these kinds of structures are, both within specific contracts, but also then the ripple effect into the broader ecosystem of these new ways of working that many of the participants on today's session have mentioned, how these new ways of working and how people kind of learn through these new ways of working, and how those new approaches can really embed in how they approach future projects. And I think to some extent, just to pick up on some of the comments in the chat around data and outcomes metrics and how do those really kind of connect in practice, I think one of the real benefits of having that shared vision around success and that contractual clarity around what is paid for is that it creates this amazing opportunity to adapt and to test and to learn what works to solve particular tricky social challenges. And at the heart of that adaptive process is data. And data is really the kind of engine that drives and informs, I think, the decision-making, the governance, and the operations of how those programs are delivered. And so if I think about the KMC DIB, we were able to very quickly use data to identify subpopulations maybe that the intervention wasn't being so successful for. So we identified quite early on that mothers who were younger or less highly educated, their babies weren't getting such good outcomes. They weren't coming for follow-up appointments. We were able to very quickly address that. And I think those user loops and by delivering that through a public sector health system, we were embedding that process of looking at data, thinking about what the data tells you, and then doing something differently to improve the beneficiary outcomes as a result within the thinking of public sector clinicians. And I'm really hopeful that that will continue. So I think both at the level of kind of contractual stakeholders, but also at the level of the systems that we're working with and through, there's real opportunity for sustained change and adaptations to practice that we hope will extend a long time beyond the duration of the DIB itself.
Thank you. I think that's a brilliant point you've made about, and perhaps we would unpick this more when we talk about pathways and enablers, because what you've just described there is this vision of working through and with the system to make sure that, especially the data, the processes, the systems, the lens through which you bring to look at these issues are embedded in the wider system, so that the project doesn't just start and end and that's it. So you're actually working with the existing system, the public sector healthcare system in your case, I think it was. And I think that is really important. And you've spoken so clearly about how data really is the engine for driving this focus on the beneficiaries, their needs, the subgroups, adaptations, improvement. So I think that probably has actually gone a long way to answering some of the questions that have been popping up on the chat. I do note a question from Quentin earlier in the chat about, could panelists talk a bit more about how these instruments help with engagement and dialogue with local governments, etc. I'm actually going to invite the panelists to delve more into that topic for the second theme. So I won't take this question just yet, but I would come to specific panelists later about that. I'm conscious that we've been talking for a while over a very vast terrain. So Andrea, could I come to you about, are there any specific things jumping out through the chat?
Questions in the chat. I think we've touched upon some of them already around the standardization questions and verification. I don't know whether any of the panelists want to add anything else on that, but perhaps we can take a question from the in-person audience here.
Yeah, let's take a question from the in-person audience, because I think we've been very, very diligent in monitoring the chat, haven't we?
Very much an experiment. So put your hand up if you want to ask a question, and just as a reminder, do introduce yourself first, just so that everyone on Zoom knows who you are. That'd be brave.
Anyone? Great.
Hi, hello everyone. Richard Johnson, I'm an advisor with the Global Fund, the World Bank, and I'm a chair of a number of different impact bonds in the UK and elsewhere. I'm really interested in the Japanese example. So you're measuring multiple impacts across a whole range of different social environmental areas. How do you actually translate that into something that is operationally realistic? So what do you actually pay for in terms of the outcomes that the program delivers?
Thank you for the question. We are now trying to create this, adapting this new concept of impact bond, which is different from cost saving, so that what we use for outcomes is actually not ideal ones maybe, but so I was working with this Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport, and so what we did is that trying to find similar projects and similar budgets, and then see how much they actually achieved something. For example, how many people come to the area to revitalize local area. And actually, so we did have long history of commuters or number of people come to the area. So to revitalize the area, actually refurbishing all the old areas to a very, very nice area, so that people come to, I don't know, relax or to do some businesses, so that the area develops more. So we took the outcome as the number of people who actually come to the area after the refurbishing or after the construction, and a certain period. And we actually analyze how many people could actually come to the area if we see the statistics of the old history. And so we could actually use more outcomes, maybe for environment, for the clean air, or I don't know, maybe the tangible, but the how happy they are at the place. So we could actually use those different kinds of outcomes, but we now that we have the data, actually, Louisa said, actually, we cannot really bring random outcomes to evaluate the multiple impacts. Actually, it gives multiple impacts, but we just set the number of people who come because we have the data, and then we are going to build up more outcomes maybe in the future to see what actually we succeeded or we achieved it during the period of evaluation. And then we might find something, or actually this might be an outcome for the next or for the future project. So we are trying to build it up. But it took long, but to answer to the question, so trying to see the similar project and then bring in the outcomes that we have already all data sets.
So just I'm clear about this. What I'm hearing that you've just said there is in answer to Richard's question about how do you actually expand the types of outcomes.
I mean, it's very specifically, because I hear all of the big, impressive policy intent, but at an operational level, and I'm all about turning this into an operation, how do you actually then convert that into a contract? And a contract is a behavior manager, which is going to drive the specific behaviors of your service provider to deliver the interventions that will ultimately lead to your impact. So what are you actually paying for in that outcomes contract?
And I think from what I've been hearing, Haruka, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're not doing it based on an efficiency calculation about how you, because certainly in the UK SIP markets, we have a lot of impact bonds, haven't we, Louise, about, you calculate what's the likely efficiency to the public sector and therefore how you price your outcomes. From what you appear to be saying, you are looking at some historic data on how when you revitalize a certain region, it leads to a certain level of economic growth, and you describe it in terms of the people coming into it. So am I right that you're using a projected economic growth model to determine how you pay for some outcomes?
Yes, we did estimation of a number of people who might come in the future, and then we set the goal. So normally, actually, the people is coming more and more every year. So if we the ratio of the growth is a normal standard set, and then if we and also we have how to say like a positive thinking way of good estimation, also the lower, also the negative one, and then we said if the highest positive trajectory is the highest outcome, and then we set 4 or 3 steps to the how much they pay, and then if the service provider is eager to reach the most positive trajectory, and then they will pay the maximum, and then so step by step. They can get a certain number of people for the certain amount of money, and that's we made it in the contract for the paying scheme.
I'm aware that this could quickly get into a very technical conversation, so maybe if Haruka and Richard, you can take that offline during networking, that'd be really great. Louise, because I think you have a lot of experience in these sorts of matters. Could I trouble to bring you in now?
Yeah, I mean, just to pull back from the specific to the general, I guess, a little bit, and to pick up also some of the comments on the chat around standardized impact metrics, and are they possible? Are they desirable? What are we talking about, and what are we paying? Because Richard's absolutely right that, to some extent you get what you pay for, and therefore the definition of those metrics is incredibly important. I think it's also important to think about metrics and what you're paying for in the context of scale, though, because what might be possible to collect if you've got 25 participants and you can survey every single one of them, or even where you're operating in a couple of regions of a country and could structure an RCT, but that would be prohibitively expensive at a national or multi-country level, may not be possible. And so these things have to be taken into account. And for me, I guess I always come back to what is the purpose of the outcome measures within these partnerships. And I think one of the purposes absolutely is to align all stakeholders around what success looks like and to very clearly define what that means. But I think it's also helpful to think about that in terms of risk. And so what those metrics are really trying to do is create a mechanism from a service provider or investor perspective to make sure that they do get paid for the impact that they have generated. And from an outcome funder or government perspective, to make sure that they're not paying for impact that would have been achieved anyway. And so I tend to talk about this as counterfactual risk, what would have happened if this hadn't taken place? And I think that's just a really helpful lens, because depending on what your historic data is, how stable your historic impact has been over time, or that data has been over time, the scale of your population, whether you're applying the intervention to a new population or a new context, like we were in Cameroon, transitioning a model from Colombia to Cameroon, quite different operating contexts. Actually, those considerations are going to really determine what kind of metrics you use. And I suspect, time for a prophecy, I suspect as these contracts become bigger scale, and as outcome funders in particular become more comfortable with them as a mechanism to drive impact, I think we will see fewer and fewer RCT-based evaluations and metrics, and more that are based around high-quality government data sets, as Haruka is saying. And I think we're seeing that particularly in middle-income countries where they're thinking about more broadly as a government, how do they track the impact of their spending, not within the context of these contracts, but just more broadly in terms of ensuring value for money for public spending. I think we will see more and more that are hooked onto, as we do a little in the UK actually, hooked onto essentially government data sets rather than specific bespoke evaluations.
Great perspectives, and I'm very conscious of time, and we're only 1/3 through the discussion. So keep the comments and observations and questions coming, especially through the chat, and Andrea will monitor that. But I think both in-person panelists have started segueing into some of the discussions around potential pathways and how you see things actually linking up from the operational to the big strategic change. So it's really back to what I was saying in the introduction, in that if these projects are to achieve these wider systemic changes, strategic level changes, it's very important, therefore, to articulate these assumed or real pathways. So, and on this note, I know, Laura, you've been sitting for a long time waiting. I'd like to come to you now, Laura, because I know that you are involved in some really, really exciting work right now on exactly this topic about how do you bring about that systems change from an ecosystem perspective. Can I come to you, Laura?
Sure. So yeah, we are, and just also picking up some comments earlier in the chat, we are interested in the potential of these tools for bringing innovation in public policies beyond the social innovation on a particular problem, but into the delivery of those services, and creating this co-creation process where the commissioner established a dialogue with, and again, this is something that came up, how you engage the players in this. And so it's about engaging commissioners with social service providers, establishing a dialogue and a co-creation process, not only with the new service providers that are going to provide the innovation, but also with existing service providers whose solutions that are already being implemented and maybe financed by the public budget, and they are complementary to what new solutions or partial solutions to a bigger problem can bring to the whole of the well-being of certain parts of the population or the total population. So it's in this sense, we think that there's got to be, first of all, there's got to be some principles that rule these social impact bonds, and everyone has to be very clear about, when I say everyone, I mean all the stakeholders involved need to be very clear about what those principles are, because if that doesn't happen, then you don't get the full potential of the social impact bond. So what happens is that you do all the work and you spend a massive amount of time and quite a lot of money, but you end up may not having, and we've seen that from other countries, you may not end up having all the potential of the tool. So we think that everyone needs to be clear on what is that is going to be achieved beyond a specific outcome, which I think is important, but it's just part of the idea of using these tools. And then there's got to be this formal space, institutional space for dialogue, where the government says, okay, here, or the commissioners say, okay, this is my priority, and then this is the problem we have. The social providers can say, okay, this is what is going on right now, and this is what we can bring to the table, and then establish this mechanism of building trust. So this whole idea of the co-creation process is about building trust on the tool, but also, you know, between the stakeholders. So we think that is very important, and we're not sure that is happening in real life when commissioners and intermediaries and social service providers are working on these social impact bonds to deliver the outcomes. And we think that that is essential for these tools to really work as intended. So it's about bringing a different way of doing things, and this cultural shift, this mindset shift of the administration and private players, including the social service providers, so that they can all engage. I mean, this may sound very utopic, but we think that's part of what we need to do, changing the way things are being done by now. So that's what we we explore with the stakeholders, and we put in this document, in this proposal.
Thanks, Laura. I'm very taken by the point you said about actually having this recognized and formal space for people to build two types of trust in the instrument and also trust in the other players in the ecosystem. And I think that's really, really interesting. I'd like to come to some of the colleagues that are working in the African context, because I think what Laura was talking about in terms of that co-creation, that facilitating these open dialogues, I hear many of you talking about that in your introductions and some of your earlier contributions. Could I come to you first, Juliette, about your take on what Laura was talking about, this co-creation dialogue space?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, I wanted to emphasize how important it is to work with the national, regional, and town level stakeholders. And so this was a very important point for the French Development Agency. We believe there are multiple ways to achieve these objectives, and I think that some of the other panelists will also highlight them. I would like to explain today what we've done with this menstrual health hygiene development in backbone in Ethiopia, and the approach that we've taken to ensure that. So first of all, we made sure that throughout the structuring of the DIB, we included multiple consultations with the local authorities, so at the different levels, federal, regional, and town level, including the sectoral offices that are very important for menstrual health and hygiene, so including education, water and sanitation, health and women affairs, to make sure that at any point of time, the interventions were being designed, taking into account their priorities, as well as leveraging the existing activities they were implementing, as well as their resources. So for example, the selection of the intervention geography in Ethiopia was decided in consultation with these officials. We've also made sure that the national guidelines that were already existing in terms of the latrine design, as well as the design of the menstrual health products, were integrated by CARE in their program. And so that was a way also for the French Development Agency to make sure to build buy-in from the Ethiopian government since the inception of the project. Secondly, at the local level, so this will be mostly so done by CARE International, the service provider. The interventions have been designed and will be implemented so by CARE and the local NGO partners in close collaboration with the regional and local sectoral offices. So we've made sure that the key resources, including personnel from the different sectorial local offices, will be leveraged as well as trained to take part in the implementation of the interventions. And so, for example, in schools, in the interventions that will happen in schools, these local officials, in collaboration with the local communities, will be in charge of overseeing the sustainable maintenance of the sanitary infrastructures that will be built and renovated by the program. They will be also, these officials leveraged and consulted through regular meetings by the service providers to make sure that they can help address any roadblocks during the life of the DIB and make sure also that learnings are possible to sustain the intervention post-DIB. And then thirdly, something that we've put in place as part of the governance of the DIB. Once launched, the DIB will include what we call a National Advisory Committee, including representatives from the different sectorial federal ministries. It will meet once a year to learn about the best practices, the results of the DIB interventions throughout the implementation. Also make sure that we can discuss with these officials any need to adapt the interventions and leverage their resources and experience in doing so, creating this dialogue between these different officials around national public policies to make sure that we can adapt them, influence them thanks to the learnings of the intervention. Also, they will support national advocacy efforts done by the service provider to promote the conditions for good menstrual health and hygiene in the country, and also prepare the conditions to further replicate and sustain the interventions in the country. So for example, in other regions, and potentially also prepare a second tranche of the DIB that could involve the participation of the Ethiopian government as an outcome funder.
Thanks, Juliet. So I hear what you're saying there about working at different levels, the federal level, the regional, the town levels. And you talk very clearly about some of the governance around the project, which again resonates with what Faisal had said earlier about involving systems players in the governance and not just necessarily the project players. Can I come to Hortense for the Cameroon Development Impact Bond? Because Louise, you had spoken earlier about how you're using that KMC DIB to flush out some of the structural barriers, work through the system, embed data as a driver for adaptive change. Hortense, might I trouble you to describe to us how that actually works in practice?
So I would like to start by saying that it was just to echo what Louise has said around the importance of working around the priority. So for the government of Cameroon and its partners, it was neonatal mortality was a priority. And even when COVID hit, all the stakeholders were keen on maintaining the outcomes-based structure or approach that is enabled through a DIB. And this did not only help us to continue the program, but then it served as a low-risk opportunity for us to test and try new ways in which KMC could not only be delivered, but to ensure that it is locally appropriate and scalable for Cameroon. Because it was very important to say here that this program was not meant to test the efficiency of KMC, but it was to test how we can use the train-of-trainer model to ensure that this is embedded within the health system. And that's the reason why there was an emphasis on the use of the implementation of this project within the health or the public health facilities. So I was just going to lastly say that the government is now using the lessons that were learned in the implementation of this project to inform the strategy for newborn care and adapting all these approaches in this planning for neonatal health. And this includes exploring how the government will take on the continued financial incentives that was introduced during this program to embed it within the broader performance-based financing structure that the government of Cameroon is using in the health sector. So just to conclude, is to say that this is was very important for the stakeholders and the government to be very clear about what the objective is and how we want that to happen and where we want it to happen. So using private hospitals was not going to be a choice, but then there was an emphasis on embedding this within the health facility. That's the reason why we could see the government at the front and center of all the negotiations, right from the contracting to implementation. And this gave us opportunity to work with the government to break through some of the barriers that we encountered in the delivery in this health facilities. And this gave us the opportunity to give the clinicians as well as Ministry of Public Health the opportunity to know what the challenges are, what is working within the context, and making sure that we are adapting a scalable approach in KMC.
Thanks, Hortense. So I've been hearing things to do with strategic alignment of priorities, really important. And Luis, you alluded to that as well, talking about the mobilization of systems players, not just project players. We're talking about working with the local ecology and embedding data system structures through that for sustainability. We're hearing Hortense, you just talked about Train the Trainer, which is one of the vehicles about building local capacity to actually effect these larger changes. So I think this whole co-creation, collaboration space, everyone keeps talking about, and perhaps it genuinely opens up that opportunity for something wonderful to happen, truly collaborative, truly unleashing synergies, maybe equalizing relationships. Is this actually workable? Is it a realistic expectation in different contexts? On this, let me come to Ichiro, because I've been neglecting you so far. I know in your introduction, you said that you've been working in and around impact bonds in Japan now for at least 8 years. So are these kinds of aspirations for co-creation, genuine collaboration, equalizing relationship, do you think feasible in the Japanese context?
Yes, exactly. I think that it's possible, feasible for such a co-creation or type of social impact bond. But first of all, as Haruka mentioned, recently a new type of social impact bonds has been emerging, for example, in the field of urban development. However, I think overall, actually, in terms of the policy making, social impact bond policy making in Japan, there has been less strategic approaches and less consistency. So I'd like to talk about the current change in the political context of social impact bond. So actually, 6 years ago, we conducted national survey on local government in Japan with regard to attitude towards social impact bonds. According to the result, most expected policy area for using impact bonds are child care support, local economic revitalization, Haruka mentioned, low income low-income family children learning support. This means that in the early years of development of impact bonds in Japan, local governments focused more on policy areas relevant to most vulnerable population. In addition, at the early stage, when some pilots were launched in the year 2015 and 2016, most of local governments seem to be concerned about wider range of social problems. However, result of such pilot project in the policy area of long-term employment and adoption of child were not necessarily successful, because in these cases, social outcomes tend to take long time for achievement of such outcomes. In addition, data collection outcome measurement was very difficult to deal with. By contrast, in more recent years in Japan, SHIB players tend to favor preventive health care as a target of SHIB interventions, because that area is considered to contribute to the fiscal cost saving, and also data collection seems to be easier by using government and the public insurance data source. More importantly, such policy areas is directly connected to central government policy priorities. In this context, impact bonds characterized as very short-term and easy data collection have been increasing in Japan now. Central government plays leading role in accelerating such a tendency by providing government fund with projects. It means social problems specific to the regions and local policy priorities tend to be less concerned, and also grassroots organizations and social sector organizations are less considered as service providers in Japan. To summarize current change in impact bonds in Japan, it's in my view, tendency for centralization and short-termism has been strengthened. In my view, such tendency is intertwined with less diversity of SHIB social impact bond players and a small number of intermediaries which exert dominant power in emerging markets. It's my view.
Thank you, Ichiro. I think what you just said there is this tension that I also pick up from what Haruka you were saying earlier between the central and the local, and actually who drives what agendas, who is interested in what agendas. And that sounds like it really contrasts with the Cameroon experience, and also what Juliet was talking earlier about Ethiopia and what you're trying to do there. So to be fair, let me bring in Reiji, who actually works in a central government department in Japan. Reiji, do you think it's fair what Ichiro has just observed about the Japanese context?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I will give a brief comment on the public-private collaboration issue from my government data management perspective. It might be related to the previous question. There are generally two issues involved. The first is the matter of cost, and the other is about privacy. First of all, I would like to emphasize that managing data in bureaucratic organization is more costly and requires expertise than you might think. Data is normally controlled in different departments with different definitions. So someone must compile it into a new data set to conduct advanced statistical analysis. In the stage of data integration, multiple peer checks are done to ensure data accuracy and consistency. In my experience, this process requires additional costs and labor. Second, regarding privacy, outcome evaluation, especially more advanced analysis, requires additional primary data, namely personal data, to calculate social impact, value for money, that is not generally shared. In my experience, participants are sometimes reluctant to share private information as a matter of their privacy, such as personal history or family data. We cannot force them to answer and share. It must be voluntary. In addition, data protection issues must be considered. This point will be different from cultural context. To summarize, in my opinion, strong leader should be essential to solve these political and technical issues in the vertical hierarchy. Therefore, I will research this point with other countries' practice at the GOLAB after visiting the UK. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Reggie. So what I hear from what you've just said is that actually the technical data issue overlaps with some of the political, the barriers that arise from the specific political barriers in Japan. And it's just interesting that what you're saying just made me think, actually, Japan is extremely data rich, but a lot of that data is held by and in central government that doesn't tend to make that data accessible even to local governments. So it's just really interesting that you reminded me of that fact, which I think, could I come to you next, Faisal? Because this political structure, data, who holds it, all these different ways of working really makes me think about the Abu Dhabi context, in that I remember one of the things that really struck me about you launching your social impact bond was you've never done anything like this before. The whole outcomes agenda was very new to Abu Dhabi. And yet from ideation to design to launch, it took only 5 months for Abu Dhabi to bring out its first impact bond, which is almost unheard of. So how did all these issues play out in your context in terms of, strategic alignment, political structures, etc.? It would be so interesting to hear that. Faisal.
Thank you, Dr. Shi. I believe this is a great question to speak about how Abu Dhabi is running or building the ecosystem of the social impact bond. First of all, you need to have a strong strategy, and the strong strategy will help you in driving a lot of social impact bond and more efficiency impact contracting in the government. So from what we did exactly, the first thing, we start small. We don't complicate the project. We make it very small with the intentions to build the familiarities of adopting the social impact bonds in the system. It was the first intentions step what we did in our strategy. The second step what we did, we engaged with 20 entities inside Abu Dhabi, the government entities. We introduced the social impact bond to them. And we built a right mechanism process and procedure about how to design the social impact bond and how Abu Dhabi will implement social impact bonds. And most of this entity, they share interest in adopting the social impact bonds, and it takes time, to design the project with them. And the third level, what we did in Abu Dhabi, we create a guideline for the social impact contracting, and we engage with Department of Finance, which is very key player when you want to put these tools as a mechanism of the government. So within 1 year, we engage with them, we develop a guideline. Each finance department, when you speak about financing, they are looking for performance. When you speak about outcomes, they are happy, to use outcome as a payment tools. And we engage with them. We show what is our plan in the guideline, and we produce this guideline with them and with Department of Procurement, which is very key milestone to put it as options, as a part of the options in the procurement system in Abu Dhabi. So this is the third step what we did. And now under our plan, we are starting to engage with multiple, we have multiple projects in our pipeline. We will raise more awareness about the social impact and contracting and social impact bond to build familiarity in the system, which is very important. And we will have in a future platform to show what is the project in our pipeline, not only the project in the implementations, also the project in the pipeline. We will engage more with the social investor through our communications, which is part of our plan. Also under our plan. This year we are targeting to launch 2 projects, and we are trying to design an outcome fund for Abu Dhabi, which will give more accelerations to adopt more social impact bonds. And going back to the questions about data, in Abu Dhabi, we are working with the government. Maybe this is what I introduced previously. And we are working closely with Department of Community Development, where they define their data. They have a clear study about the social priority area, and they define different outcomes. And this is one of the key, I will say, goal when we are starting adopting the social impact bonds. So they define multiple priority area where Abu Dhabi is looking to create a more efficiency outcomes in the area of social, also in the area of social value for money.
Thanks, Faisal. So again, the story I keep hearing from Abu Dhabi is this real top-level strategic alignment, strategic engagement based on really detailed data. You have defined social priorities that you actually delegate to different departments to lead, and that's really, really interesting. And you try to start small deliberately to build up that familiarization. Fareed, could I just come quickly to you, because you mentioned earlier that just like what Faisal says, you are doing a bond to model something, and are you just trying to do that in healthcare? So the same logic that other speakers are talking about, or is it wider than that?
There's been a bit of interest in the education section for social impact bonds. So we're really thinking that lessons that we, can be learned from our healthcare projects will be valuable across the social services sector. In South Africa, there have been impact bonds for youth employment. It's been outside of the government sector, but within the government sector, our aim is to reach social services in general. Within our the Medical Research Council, where I work, we will limit our portfolio to the health sector, mainly because that's where our expertise lies. But there's an interest across the social sector within government. Thanks.
Thank you. There was a sneeze going on. Just quickly coming to Mayapan, because I just recognize I've been neglecting you through this whole chat. Rakshita talked earlier about this modeling, and I think Krisha also talked about then driving certain kinds of efficiencies, a templating, etc. From your perspective in India, do you see that templating, that replication, the guidelines that Faisal was talking about in Abu Dhabi, do you see those as some of the mechanisms for you to achieve scale and to cascade the impact?
Sure. So I think there is a lot of interest in that. So just to give everybody a quick background, when we got into this space, I think the real challenge before us was scaling and really bringing, structuring something that could be replicated and serve as a platform for different kind of funders, offshore and onshore, both outcome funders and risk investors, and to be able to deploy that capital to both non-profit or for-profit service providers or implementing agencies. That was really the task we were given a few years back. The challenge is, I think there were some, the legal system here is still very antiquated in the sense that any sort of sophisticated interaction between for-profit and non-profit money, that sort of intermixing is viewed with suspicion, and that cuts through all the laws. So there is not a favorable ecosystem of laws that actually enables this. In fact, at a fundamental level, it tries to prevent this from happening. And then the challenge we faced was we came up with a structure that fit within the current legal framework, which worked for the risk investors, which was the point I think Richard was making. But for outcome funders, they are willing to take financial risk, but not regulatory or reputational risk. So which was a pretty significant kind of a problem, because as a law firm, we give a legal opinion. It is an innovative structure. You can't say there is a Supreme Court ruling saying this is kosher, right? I mean, there is a little bit of you're doing something new. So, but the risk appetite was quite different. And from there, the key laws that apply in India, there are a bunch of 4 or 5 key laws under the 5 or 6 different ministries and regulators, and not all of them always work in sync. Unlike the example by Faisal, I think we don't have that level of coordination here. So even if 4 laws are in tandem, a single law or a change can actually, kill a transaction. And we have faced severe challenges over the last year. We've had, it's a bit of shifting sands, and it's not, and the challenge with scaling and replication is the same structure that worked 4 years back may not work the same way today because the laws have changed, the sands have shifted. So that is something I think, and what we realize, which is why a lot of our efforts are also on the policy direction, is to bring outcome funders on board and achieve scale. We need comfort on the regulatory side that the government is on board and they clarify the regulations and there is stability and their involvement is required. So I think as a group, as a community, we are all trying to do that and have more government engagement. But they, of course, ask for evidence. Why should I change the law unless where is the cost benefit analysis of that? Where is the track record to show that you're achieving X amount of, so where is the incentive for me to do that? So I think with more within the framework we are putting in, I see some impact bonds coming up. I think that track record will help make the case in the future for further deregulation. I think with that clarity, I think we can see a lot more scale happening in the future.
Thanks. That's so important. That's so interesting listening to how you're using cases as almost testing the law and setting a legal precedent for replication. I just come lastly to Abba, because Abba, I know you always have quite provocative ways of looking at things. So we're talking about pathways, right? So any provocations on your part about what you've been hearing?
Good. Firstly, thank you to Maya for saying that. We really do have to think like that with our lawyers, and we love lawyers who think with us. The worst is a lawyer who says no, 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 and the best is a lawyer who says we can try, because that is the only way social change is possible. So one big thumbs up for our lawyers there. The provocation here for me is to keep it simple. Impact bonds are not everybody's answers to everything, and some of this conversation is making me feel that it might be seen as being that. And I think there are some things impact bonds can solve. They're one tool for government for paying for outcomes for some areas of work. They can't solve everything. And as long as we keep that and we grow what it's meant to do, which is deliver social outcomes, use the pandemic as a sort of, the burning platform to make sure the focus is there, that would be good. Grant, I often find, focuses on multiple outcomes, complex outcomes. Sometimes reducing it down to show government, listen, we can do this, and then we can do it at scale, because it's down to 5 or 6 things that are absolutely necessary and a must for a district to be performing at the last mile in India or in Pakistan or wherever we are working. I think it's critical. I think simplicity has to be there if it's seen as a sensible tool for public procurement. So some of the early adopters have to keep coming back to that. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Abba. And I'm really, really conscious of time. We're already at 11:30. And, I just can't stop because this is such an interesting topic. And there's so many different perspectives, especially when you're 13 speakers. And just being able to have enough time scratching the surface of each of them has been wonderful. I'm not actually going to get everyone to talk about enablers as they perceive, because we are running out of time, but just off the top of my head, and also I think in a lot of your contributions throughout, you have been alluding to or actually explicitly talking about enablers, such as the importance of strategic alignment. You need to look at the governance of individual projects, but also the wider governance around projects. You need to look at data. You need to look at how you work in a way that embeds things in the system. You need to look at culture. You need to look at legal, regulatory barriers. So there's this whole set of enablers, none of which just operate in isolation. And certainly their significance in different contexts also vary. I think my mind is whirring and I'm about to run out of water. But, the takeaway for me from this session really is that we really, as a community, need to do more work in stepping back from just studying projects. I think a lot of the things I've been hearing from people today are the things that happen behind the scenes, that people are engaged in these discussions, but they're not articulated, they're not documented anywhere. And so there are all these assumed pathways about how doing outcomes projects can bring about these wider systems change, but these pathways aren't actually documented clearly. And I don't think we're necessarily tracking or testing them. So I think that's my takeaway from it. I'm really out of time to take questions, but do keep the chats coming. We'll collate them. And certainly there's a networking after this. I want to thank all of my wonderful, wonderful panelists and all of you for staying online and joining at whatever hours in your time zones. And a great big thanks to Andrea and Tanya for the support and the run up to today, and a wonderful tech and AV team at the school. So join me in giving everyone a big hand. Thank you, everyone.
Huge thanks to you, Chiho. It's been brilliant. I think a career in TV awaits for you.
Anyone wants to book me for Panto?
Really interesting. I can't believe it's been 2 hours since we started. Huge thanks, everyone. Hope that felt okay for everyone. Thank you, everyone on Zoom. Hope you all feel like you were able to connect with those of us in Oxford. And huge thanks for being so active in the chat. As I mentioned in the Zoom chat, we'll keep this Zoom link open for another half an hour. So do stay on if you'd like to continue some of the conversations. Networking is part of the fun of attending a conference. We'll just put people in randomly allocated breakout rooms, but you should be able to move yourselves from a room to another. For those of you in Oxford, we've got tea and coffee outside waiting for you. And we'll reconvene a bit later, 12:30, I believe, in lecture theatre 1. We'll hear from Mara a little bit, and then we'll hear from Professor Stiglitz at 1 o'clock. Great, huge thanks everyone.